Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Echoes of Shattered Destiny. Episode 15. Chapter 108 to 116. The morning was much quieter than either one of us expected. I was thankful Brandon rarely seemed to be home, since he loved to stir things up between him and Maddox. How Maddox hadn't lost his temper and banished Brandon from the pack was beyond me, but I treasured every peaceful moment his infuriating brother was absent for. We had expected a small uproar. It wasn't every day your Luna was revealed to double as the vampire queen. My priorities were quite literally divided down the center, between two groups of people that wanted to kill one another. While there was some outcry by many of the older, seasoned members of the pack, there hadn't been the large-scale uproar we were expecting. During the battle and warring back home, rumors had spread across the country. The struggle between our pack and the vampires was common knowledge. Thankfully, us werewolves were a tough breed. There weren't many of us who feared a murderous vampire or rogue. That morning we met up with Rowena at the house Giovanni and Brianna were staying at. The rather small living room was packed with werewolves, vampires and the odd witch or two. The scent of blood and food intermingled in the air, like a strange and decadent perfume. Giovanni and Tristan each leaned against the wall, from their respective sides of the room since neither had called a ceasefire on their feud. Tristan hovered closer to where Holly stood, only a few feet from the stairs so she could make a hasty retreat. He had managed to get her into the living room, but she hadn't yet stepped foot from the house. I perched myself on the arm of the couch, beside where Brianna sat. Maddox stood to my right, and Mason to his right. "It's wonderful to meet you, Holly." Rowena smiled warmly. Her auburn hair was twisted into a loose knot on her head, and the mossy wrap-around dress she wore swished with her every move. It was odd to see how friendly and non-threatening she looked, especially after last night. The knife-wielding, blood magic practicing school teacher, was an enigma I planned to learn more about. Holly's eyes roamed Rowena's face, undoubtedly seeing the same radiance I had first noticed. She brushed the strands of onyx hair from her face, the same color and length as my own. It was the only feature, along with our slate-gray eyes, that Holly and I shared. "You're the Blood Witch," was all she said, her voice much softer than mine. "I'm not a practicing one, but I know the craft." Rowena nodded pleasantly, reaching down to where her bag sat on the floor. She pulled two leather-bound books from within, the covers dry and peeling. They smelled of oils and dried lavender as she held them out for Holly. "I understand how difficult this is for both of you. To be unprepared for your own awakening, it's not something I would wish on any young witch. I am not here to force you into anything. These books are to read at your own pleasure, while you decide if my help is something you might want." I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until Holly moved ever so slowly and took the books from Rowena's hands. Clutching them to her chest, she retreated back to her place. My eyes flickered to Maddox's and understanding passed between us. It was an improvement, and even the smallest counted. A word of warning from someone with years of experience: ignoring what is going on inside of you will only make it manifest harder. Gaining control of your magic, that is the cure you seek. Brianna left with Maddox and I, going back to the house to get ready for the party. There was a hint of nerves bundled in my gut, especially since coming out as the vampire queen, but I had always loved a good party, that hadn't changed, nor had it for Brianna. The sweltering sun mixed with the coveted shade that blanketed the sprawling lake. I began to understand why this place was adored by so many people and why the locals tend to keep it a secret. Trees of pine and oak surrounded the lake, which was larger than any I had seen before. It was clearly well taken care of, because the water was free of any algae or growth and the small pavilions were free of any litter. A large beach area surrounded the lake, along with numerous piers every 50 or so feet. Pickup trucks were backed onto the sand, the beds stacked with beach towels and cases of beer. College students and young adults milled about, some in bikinis and swimming trunks while others sported your usual jean short and tank top combo. I adjusted the straps on the bi I wore and followed Brianna from the Escalade while Maddox found some place suitable to park. Brianna's sky blue bi matched the shade of her eyes, and the bottoms tied into little bows at her hips. There were numerous looks casted our way, some lingering far longer than others. Joe's coming down to the party once the sun sets. Figured it might be a safe way to introduce a vampire into the pack. He can be a bit overprotective, since I can't shift and all. Joe? How does he feel about this new nickname? I smirked softly, still feeling that pang of guilt in my chest for my best friend's fate. Oh, he hates it. She sighed dramatically, her face falling. I thought I'd try it until it stuck, but it's not really working, is it? Not really. I replied, laughing at the forlorn look on her face. Hey, gorgeous! A raspy, self-assured voice called out. I turned and found myself staring at the chest of a blonde-headed male. I had to crane my head upwards to see his tanned face and chocolate eyes. Sand covered his shoulders and chest, and a volleyball was wedged between his arm and torso. You're sure grabbing everyone's attention, you and your cute friend. I opened my mouth to answer, but another guy beat me to it. One with shaggy brown hair jogged up and clapped him on the shoulder, his eyes wide and roaming my face. I didn't miss how he inched his friend away from me, or how the nearby people stopped their conversations to watch. Bro, this is the Luna. The one with the brown hair hissed, his voice inching lower. You better hope Alpha isn't nearby. He's never come to a party before. Blondie hesitated, his eyes growing wide as he swallowed and looked towards his friend. The vamp chick. The one and only, but I'm going to be upset if you call me that. I warned, keeping my tone light. The last thing I needed was to freak everyone out. This was about getting the pack to accept me and the rest of the vampires looking for peace. Maddox decided to tag along, but he won't skin your hide for calling me gorgeous. Mistakes happen, we're just here to enjoy the party. Looping my arm in Brianna's, I steered the two of us away from the shell-shocked males, hearing the whispered tidbits of our conversation flow from other people's mouths. We found Maddox nearly 10 minutes later, as the rush of people attending grew heavier. It hadn't been us who spotted Maddox first, but his childhood friend, Cassidy. Her sun-kissed hair ran down her back in golden curls, and the white bi she wore highlighted the rich tan to her skin. She looked as though she belonged on a beach in LA, not living deep within the forest in the middle of a pack of wolves. She spoke very animatedly, using her hands as she chatted with Maddox. There was always that twinge of possessiveness whenever he spoke to another she-wolf, no matter their position in his life or pack. I swallowed that bitter feeling down and followed Brianna to his side. I swear, finding your mate instantly makes you the jealous type. Brianna snickered under her breath. I nearly took Giovanni's head off for letting the grocery store clerk touch his arm. I don't like her. Maya said simply. She gives me a bad feeling. She doesn't give me a bad feeling. I snorted, knowing Maya would instantly detest anyone she viewed as a threat. Besides, she hasn't so much as touched him. She's just overly enthusiastic. Luna, I'm so glad you've made it. I heard Cassidy squeal as soon as we came into view, proving my earlier statement. It was hard not to return her smile, especially when she genuinely did look pleased. There was no doubt in my mind, she had heard the announcement and knew the truth just like the rest of the pack. Her golden curls bounced as she chirped, I spent hours setting this entire thing up, sorting through everyone who wanted to come. We had to keep it invite only, since your big announcement and all of that, but this will give us plenty of time to get to know one another. Oh, who is your this? This is Brianna, one of my best friends. I grinned, reining in my laugh as Brianna gave Cassidy a stunned look. She did come on strong, but so far, she had been nothing but friendly. It's so wonderful to meet you. She tittered, her eyes darting across the crowd as though she saw someone she recognized. I'm going to run and grab us all some drinks. Afterwards we can find a good spot to put our towels. Wait until you see this place at night. I swear, I put enough lights in the forest to turn the town into a beacon. She's a bit intense. Brianna giggled. Cassidy's always been enthusiastic about everything. Maddox snorted, making my mouth go dry when he removed the black t-shirt he had been wearing. I ignored the blatant looks coming from at least 15 different she-wolves and focused on the fact that his churning eyes on me. Her and Brandon had always been closest. I preferred spending most of my time alone, but there were times when I would hang out with them. Somehow, I'm not surprised you like to spend most of your time alone. Brianna teased lightly. Cassidy came back with a smile on her face, carrying 3 cans and a glass bottle. She handed Maddox an amber bottle of some strong-smelling beer, while handing me a can of those fruity margaritas. I set my open drink on the trunk of a nearby car whilst taking my own t-shirt off. Maddox brought the bottle to his lips, and the way his nose scrunched disdainfully had me erupting in laughter. Is it good? I teased. As good as cheap beer can be. He grunted, his eyes dragging down the length of my body until he stopped just where my hands were, fumbling with the button to my shorts. Not all of us can afford that fancy bourbon you drink. Cassidy giggled, but Maddox's attention was otherwise diverted. I personally think it tastes like gasoline either way. In one long stride he stood inches in front of me, swatting my fumbling hands away with ease. As his fingertips grazed across my lower stomach, undoing the button that had been giving me trouble, whilst also making my core clench painfully, for a split second, I glanced at the surrounding forest and contemplated our chances of being spotted should we slip away. The corners of his lips twitched ever so slightly. Eavesdropping on my thoughts. I mused, stuffing my clothes into my backpack while snatching up my drink. I had yet to taste it, but from scent alone, I could tell the taste of beer would well overpower the strawberry flavoring inside. Only when they have to do with you dragging me off into the forest to seduce me. His voice sounded lower, raspy with need. Wait until night falls. I warned him, bringing the canned margarita to my lips. I might still follow through on that plan. The sizzle of carbonation hit my lips when a gleeful whoop filled the air, carrying a voice I had been dreading hearing all day. I set my wasted drink on the chromed-out bumper of someone's pickup truck. The prospect of drinking no longer sounded so alluring, not when Brandon was currently wandering through the crowd, his eyes blown wide with gleeful interest as he sauntered my way. Chapter 109. Brandon. Maddox's voice held a warning beneath its calm facade, as did his eyes, which were currently latched onto where his brother stood. Oh, relax. You're awful uptight considering the big secret is now out. What was that saying? Oh, that's right. The truth will set you free. Do you feel free, brother? He held a beer bottle in his hand, the condensation still running down the sides in thin rivulets. With both Maddox and Brandon standing before me, shirtless and in swimming trunks, it was easy to see the similarities between the two. Maddox's hair was a tad darker, but both had the same jaw shape and broad shoulders, the athletic body that bordered on massive in size. Where Maddox was stingy with his facial expressions, Brandon held absolutely nothing back even when he should. "How can I ever feel free, Brandon? I'm alpha to the largest pack in the country, and you're my brother." Admittedly, I held my breath for those few seconds, unsure what Maddox's reaction would be. A few dryly tossed words I could handle, so long as the blistering sun didn't set them aflame. "You too, I swear." Cassidy shook her head at the two of them before giving me a smile that said, "This happens often." She strutted over to where some of the water coolers sat, smirking at a few guys who turned her way. The familiar hiss of carbonation sounded from the bottle in her hand. Shoving the opened beer towards Brandon, she laughed. "Quit looking for a fight and enjoy the party. It's never been packed like this before." "That's because our alpha has never dared grace one of our lowly college parties, and I already have a beer." Brandon snickered but took the beer from her hand and drank deeply. I didn't bother hiding my look of absolute disgust and rolled my eyes when he winked playfully. "You're almost finished your first, and you know how busy your brother is." Cassidy snorted. "Besides, Eric says there are a lot of kids here from Stratford Prep, and for it to be a college party, you have to be in college, Brandon." Maddox commented, swiveling his eyes downward to the two beer bottles in his brother's hands. Brandon, ever the challenge, gave Maddox a teasing smile and took another long drink. "Cass is in college, and she bought the beer." "Same if you ask me." He shrugged but perked up as he registered what Cassidy had said. "Did you say Stratford Prep?" "I sure did." Cassidy's petal-colored lips tilted up in a feminine smirk, which Brandon devoured with one of his sultry smiles. "Sorry, gorgeous. It's not going to work out between us, not tonight, anyhow." I visibly jumped when Maddox's snarl rang out into the air, making all conversation within a 10-foot radius halt. It took me a few seconds after his threatening snarl, staring at Brandon's muscular back as he retreated, to realize he had been talking to me. "Is there something special about Stratford Prep students?" Brianna asked curiously. Cassidy chuckled low, a coy smile on her face. "Stratford Prep students wear uniforms. Brandon has a very passionate love for plaid skirts and high socks. And if he ever tries to deny it, I have proof." Suddenly, an image came to mind. I could tell from the clarity and vividness that it wasn't coming from my head, but Maddox's. All too quickly my eyes strayed from the background, which happened to be a rugged office with animal pelts and lots of dark cherry wood, to Maddox's form. He sat in the desk chair, his hair and eyes dark as night. The unyielding look of hunger and violence on his face did something to my insides. He looked like the CEO of a company or the king of a country, staring down at all those smaller than him. And on her knees in front of him, wearing nothing but a pleated skirt and long socks, was me. My mouth went dry instantaneously, and I regretted setting my opened drink unattended on the bumper of someone's truck. Heat coursed through me, coating my skin in a thin layer of sweat that had nothing to do with the sun, and everything to do with the way Maddox was looking at me. I hadn't seen him move, but I swore time halted around us as his arm snaked around my waist. My hands fell flat against his chest, my palms tickled by the sparks that danced between our bodies, our bonded souls. I could feel him in the deepest corners of me, intertwined in everything that made me who and what I was. His depraved words, leaking desperation that only I could satiate, they controlled the very functions of my body until it bended to his will. As his lips fell on my own, sucking the words and breath from my lungs, a gasp managed to emerge when his tongue darted out and grazed my own. "Say the word, Lola." His voice was deep, raspy, and dark with need that had been held back for far too long. Say the word and I'll drag you into the forest. I'll make sure everyone can hear how addicting your little whimpers sound. Oh, Alex is here. I have to introduce you to her, Luna. Cassidy's soprano broke the spell between Maddox and I, drawing my attention to a dark-haired girl nearby. She stood at one of those cheap plastic tables, grabbing at the various bottles of cheap liquor as she poured and mixed them into a single cup. As she flipped her hair over her shoulder, I noticed the distinctive lime green streak running down the side of her head. She's Maddox's cousin, and she's been chomping at the bit to meet you. Especially after last night's announcement. You can call me Lola. Cassidy quickly got her attention, nearly making her spill the concoction she had spent the last 5 minutes making. Alex came jogging over, unleashing a dimpled grin that perfectly matched her pale-colored eyes and electric green streak. The swimming trunks and top she wore were the same vibrant shade of lime green. My eyes were drawn to the bit of jewelry that dangled from her septum, and the ones that dotted her ears. It's an honor to meet you, especially after that big reveal last night. The name is Alex, our Alpha's only tolerable relative. From the confidence in which she said it, and the ghost of a smirk on Maddox's face, I took it most people found Brandon as insufferable as I did. I noticed as we talked, there were others listening in. Heads were cocked in our direction, eyes darting anywhere but to where our small group stood. It was still new to me, being the center of attention. I've got to say, it's pretty badass that you're the vampire queen. For however long you and my cousin stay in town, I know you'll run into some hateful people. Try not to listen to them, there's plenty of us who are on your side. We know that when change comes, it's not always the most comfortable thing. I really appreciate that, Alex. I told her genuinely, hoping the eavesdropping werewolves were listening closely. She took a long drink of the concoction in her hand and nodded, satisfied with whatever flavor she had created. It's been hard, figuring everything out, but I don't scare easily. I'm sure you don't. You wouldn't survive being mated to my cousin if you did. She laughed, but her eyes were snagged by someone further along the beach. Her eyes lit up, like small oases. Oh, that's my girlfriend over there. I'll catch up with you later and introduce you to her, Luna. It was great seeing you again, Cass. I'll send you a call later tonight. Talk to you then. Cassidy shouted back as Alex waved and ran off towards a curvy redhead. She turned to Maddox and gave him a nod. If you don't mind, I'm stealing your mate and her best friend. I want to get to know them better without you looming around and scaring the unmated males off. He does loom, doesn't he? Brianna snickered under her breath, averting her eyes when Maddox's intense gaze fell on her. I think I'll locate Zeke before he finds the Stratford prep students. Maddox grunted, giving me one last look before turning and walking through the parting crowd. I could still feel the heat in his eyes along my skin. Girls and guys, both lounging on towels and playing in the glittering water, watched their alpha move through the crowd. I had to remind myself that this wasn't something Maddox typically did. The first thing I did was leap into the startlingly cold water, letting out a great sigh the moment it wiped the sweat from my skin and doused the heat blossoming inside of me. Brianna followed while Cassidy climbed the small hill and jumped in via the rope swing. A slew of cheers rose as she landed with a splash. Chapter 110. After almost an hour, I felt a pair of arms wrap around my waist. Unlike when Brandon touched me, there was no gut feeling telling me this touch was wrong. I turned around and grinned at Maddox, placing my hands on his shoulders as I bobbed up and down. The tips of my toes grazed the silt at the bottom of the lake, just barely. I should have put floaties on your arms. His lips twitched into a smirk, and his eyes narrowed playfully. I gave him a look full of offense and frowned. I'm short, that doesn't mean I'm going to DN. I still know how to swim. Besides, if I had floaties on, then I wouldn't need to do this. I wrapped my arms around his neck, letting my fingers tangle in the unruly strands of his hair. He was beginning to need a trim, which gave me plenty to grab onto. I felt his reaction the moment I slid my legs around his waist. All too quickly, my hands left his hair and traveled down the hard expanse of his chest, marveling at the feel of his wet muscles. "And how is our good friend Zeke doing?" I asked, lifting an eyebrow when Maddox sighed. "He's searching for his soulmate while having a few drinks to take the edge off," Maddox quoted, giving me a look so dry that I couldn't help but laugh. "So, he's getting drunk and flirting with a bunch of she-wolves?" I smirked. "Naturally," he grunted. "Is that what you did, Maddox?" I asked, my voice growing low as I moved my lips inches from his ear. Jealousy, jagged like glass, sliced through my gut, and yet I continued. "When you needed someone to fill your bed, would you go to a party and bring some girl home? I never needed to search, there were plenty of she-wolves more than willing to jump into my bed." His honesty seared my insides, but I wasn't one to cower and hide when emotions grew too tough. His words challenged mine, earning a snarl from my lips that was smothered when he continued, "It had only ever been S**x in my mind, nothing more." They knew that, of course, but that didn't change a spare few from wanting more. People, human or otherwise, always want what they can't have. "Is that why you wanted me, because you knew you couldn't have me?" I purred, relaxing against his rigid form. "Who says I couldn't have you, Lola?" He chuckled, shaking his head slowly. I swallowed heavily, unable to form words whenever his voice turned low and threatening. "You were mine the minute you were late to training. The moment you opened your mouth and talked back to me, you were mine." Pulling him into the forest was becoming more alluring by the second. Nearly an hour later, Maddox was called from the water by a tipsy Zeke. He had no choice but to follow, especially since Zeke was known for getting himself into trouble. Sober, he was the life of the party; drunk, he was the type of person to break into the zoo and release the animals. I lost track of time as we swam, occasionally bumping into someone Cassidy knew, which seemed to be every other person. There was a small cliff everyone was jumping off, along with a waterfall just beneath. I jumped a few times, calling it quits. Brandon had mentioned Cassidy went to college in town, and from the looks of it, she was more than popular. It was refreshing to see that she had kept her friendly demeanor instead of turning into a raging BH like I had. Cassidy introduced Brianna and I to everyone we ran into, feeding us facts about their lives. Her presence and friendly smile convinced some of the more wary partygoers to relax. What had me sold was how casually she talked about my position and what I was. It sounded normal coming from her mouth, like a tribrid was an everyday occurrence. In all that time, I hadn't seen or heard from Maddox. No matter which direction I looked, he was nowhere to be found, but I knew he was watching. I could never mistake the feel of his eyes on me, no matter how far away he was. As the sun began to dip lower and lower, using the trees as cover to cast heavy shadows along the lake and beach, bonfires began flickering to life all around the lake, carrying the scent of burning wood. I sat on one of the giant beach towels we brought along, with none other than Cassidy at my side. The humid air thinned, becoming brisk as a gentle breeze drifted across the still water. Brianna had left just a few minutes ago, in search of Giovanni, who had left the moment the sun vanished from sight. "I can't thank you enough for what you did back there," I could tell some of them felt uncomfortable and even afraid, but they believed you when you said I only wanted what was best for the pack. I'm really involved in the community, especially with the college in town. These people know and trust me. Half of them watched Maddox, Brandon, and I grow up. They're already beginning to trust you, even without my reassurance. Most of them are fairly good judges of character. I returned her radiant smile with one of my own, surprised that I was coming to like my mate's gorgeous and perky friend. Her eyes darted to a group of nearby guys, who were making as much noise as possible as they clamored towards us. The one at the lead had shaggy blonde hair, cropped short on the sides. A thin scar ran through the tail of his eyebrow, giving him almost a sinister look. Like the rest of the alcohol-fueled werewolves in his group, they were all shirtless and wearing swim trunks. "You ladies mind if we build our fire here?" the head of the group asked, nodding briefly to the flat space of beach in front of us. I didn't miss the way his blacked-out eyes twinkled, staring down at Cassidy like the golden-haired goddess she was. "Sure. I was feeling a bit cold, actually." She smirked delicately, letting her hair cascade over her shoulder. In a move that would have reeked inexperience if I had done it, she stretched her tanned legs out slowly. "Oh, she's good," Maya murmured. It took Cassidy 20 minutes of flirting before her and Lars, the guy with the eyebrow scar, were ready to ditch the rest of us. I stood alongside of her, dusting the sand from my sweatshirt and shorts. "I'm going to find Maddox," I assured her with a friendly grin. "It was really nice hanging out with you, Cassidy." "Oh, are you sure? I feel horrible ditching you." She frowned, eyes darting to where Lars was talking with his friends, a beer in his hand. Her hair formed a golden halo around her shoulders. "We absolutely have to plan something, just for us girls." "Oh, and call me Cass." "Everyone does." "It's all good, I need to find him and Zeke anyway." I smirked, nodding towards Lars. "Have fun, Cass." "Oh, I plan on it." She winked and ran up to Lars, linking her arm through his as she easily melted into the conversation. "You think college would give us better social skills?" Maya asked as we ventured away from the bonfire, further down the beach. I continued walking, watching as the cars began to thin out. The next fire was at least 50 feet away, a small speck of flame in the distance. "I don't think so." "Doesn't change the fact that neither one of us have a filter." I shrugged unapologetically. I don't typically mind the lack of self-control, just don't go challenging any more alphas. She snorted. "I don't plan on it, just the vampire queen I've been looking for." It wasn't Maddox's raspy voice I heard, but someone unbearably similar. I was immediately on the defensive when I turned and stared into Brandon's glassy eyes. It was clear he was tipsy or borderline drunk, but there was still a good bit of lucidity to his gaze. "I wasn't aware there was more than one vampire queen," I commented, turning on my heel as I planned to make a hasty getaway. His hand closed around my wrist, and I froze. "Come in, Lola. I'm not that bad. I swear, I'm just an A*S when I drink." Any other girl would have missed the teasing tone his voice had, how it was buried beneath layers of practice and skill. I could tell it was there because Maddox did the same thing. "My brother doesn't deserve the queen of all vampires as his mate." "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly the first time," I began, my back still turned and my wrist still fully in his grasp. I have a tendency to mumble. I turned on my heel, feeling my muscles bunch and coil as I used the inhuman speed of both my werewolf and vampire heritage. Time slowed and I could see the surprise as it dawned across his drunken face, filling his glossy eyes until they overflowed with it. My fist slammed into his stomach, crushing his abs beneath my knuckles. I gave him no time to recover as he doubled over and sent my knee careening into his BS, the same bits I had seen when he welcomed Maddox and I into town. He grunted and groaned as he went down, his knees sinking into the damp sand. I stared down at him, knowing he could see my stirring within my eyes. I don't care what your problem is with your brother, I don't care what strange feud you two have going on. You will not use me to get a rise out of him, and you will not lay a hand on me. Chapter 111. While I'd initially been searching for Maddox, it hadn't been my intention to go scurrying to him, squealing about his younger brother's lack of boundaries and basic respect for women. I squashed the part of me that wondered why Brandon was such an A*s, especially towards his older brother, reminding myself it wasn't my job to figure him out. There were far more worrisome things that had my attention, like murderous witches and plotting vampires. You should have let me come out. Maya huffed for the third time, her bloodlust not at all satiated. It felt nice leaving him groaning in the sand, his beer overturned and forgotten. Maya's version of justice held the ruthlessness of a Luna. A nasty scar or a hand, that would teach him. He'd never touch us again. I won't be known as the Luna who bites off hands. I told her pointedly but snorted when she snapped her teeth. Well, hello your majesty. Careful, Zeke. I've already need one guy in the BS, and I'd hate to damage your favorite organ. I smirked, not at all surprised when I turned to find a sharp-eyed brunette beneath his muscular arm. Her bottom-heavy lips were turned up in a friendly smile, amused by my witty comment. The cropped tube top she wore had a small butterfly on the front, matching the pale bi bottoms tied at her hips. I knew instantly, from the slim figure to the glossy and expertly curled hair, that this girl was popular. It was evident in the way she held herself, how she grinned and nodded at people who looked her way. With every turn of her head, the silvery highlighter on her cheeks caught the moonlight. I have no doubt Brandon deserved much worse. That should keep him off you for the next 48 hours, at least. Zeke laughed fully, his chest expanding and lips widening to a dimpled grin. How he and Maddox had maintained a friendship for so long astounded me. I guess opposites truly did attract, even with brooding and savage alphas. Maya wanted to take a hand. I told them, sighing. His BS will recover quickly, unfortunately. I would have gone with your wolf's suggestion. Nothing short of maiming will chase Brandon off, not when he's hell-bent on pissing off Maddox. Zeke shook his head, but quickly cheered up as the brunette placed her hand on his chest, looking up at him with curious eyes. Ah, right. Lola, this is Carson. She's the president of one of the sororities at the university. There was a certain eagerness in her baby blue eyes, and a friendliness that put me oddly at ease. Alpha Phi, and we're the largest in the state. I knew I had to meet you after that whirlwind of an announcement. Our sorority's vision is lifting powerful women, not breaking them down. It's so amazing that our Luna is the embodiment of that. She smiled sweetly, her words warm and surprisingly honest. The tips of her manicure tapped across the phone in her hands, as she opened the camera app. Her lips looked even more pouty when she asked, I run the sorority's IA. Could I get a few pictures with you, Luna? Pretty please? You'll send our followers through the roof, and just in time for Spirit Week. Oh, sure of course. I stammered, caught off guard. I caught Zeke's smirk and snarled at him, making Carson giggle. She all but shoved the phone into his hands while rushing to my side. Make sure you get us both in the center. No, ugh. Not from that angle. Are you trying to make us look two-dimensional? She shook her head disparagingly, an alpha who hasn't mastered the art of taking a basic picture, Tragic. After positioning both Zeke and me, Carson posed at my side, placing a hand on her hip as she grinned proudly at the camera. I froze my smile in place and counted the number of photos he snapped. After the first 10 she had me remove my sweatshirt, and finally my shorts. The last few shots were of us in our BIs, the full moon and glittering lake in the background. These are perfect. Thank you so much, Luna. She beamed, bouncing on her heels as she swiped through the pictures. Her eyes darted up from the cell phone, glittering mischievously. Also, we're having an after party at the frat house next door. You and Alpha are more than welcome to come. It would be an honor, actually. I'll see what I can do, I promised her, returning the excited grin she gave me with one of my own. Turning to Zeke, I asked. Speaking of Maddox, have you seen him? I escaped him half an hour ago, somewhere towards the docks. We're headed to the after party. Your cock-block of a mate seems hell-bent on keeping me in sight. He chuckled, his laugh mixing with Carson's. Under firelight, the golden flames highlighted his sharp jaw and chocolate eyes, his features even more charming. Unlike Brandon, I know when to keep my hands to myself. I trust you won't get yourself into trouble. I lifted an eyebrow at him, scenting his lie the moment his lips twitched. I would never. He vowed, a hand on his chest and the other around Carson's waist. It was great meeting you, Luna. Follow us on IA. Carson waved, gazing up at Zeke as they left. I could hear her giggling fading in the distance, along with his raucous laughter. How much trouble can he get himself into at a frat party? Maya snorted. I continued along the beach, passing dimming fires surrounded by college students, either too drunk or high to notice their Luna wading through them. Couples were tangled around one another, filling the air with their sighs and breathless gasps. Maddox. I called down the bond, feeling its soothing thrum course through me, connecting me to Maddox no matter where we both were. I waited until seconds turned to minutes, and my lips turned down. Shaking away that inkling of worry, I tried to sort through the hundreds of scents that crowded the beach, overlapping one another as they mixed with the scent of fresh water. I strayed closer to the forest line as I walked around a larger group, their fire 3 times the size of the others I had seen. I had no intention of stopping but halted in my tracks when a voice sneered my name. It wasn't one I had heard before, but I'd never mistake that ignorant, demeaning tone. Luna Lola? Is that really you? When I heard you were coming I thought you'd out. I stopped in my tracks and turned, gazing at the half-illuminated figure of a tipsy frat guy. His polo was the same sky blue color as his eyes and fit perfectly to his athletic form. The shorts, sandals, and cheap beer in his hand only enhanced the spoiled jock look. I made no mistake, even drunk, there was a cruel intelligence in his eyes, and determination. His voice caught the attention of the others sitting around the fire. Couples untangled themselves, the sounds of their kissing fading beneath the crackle of flame. We knew this would happen. I reminded Maya, and myself, that violence wasn't always the answer. There's going to be backlash. What matters is how we deal with it. This is why I'm the one who handles diplomacy. I don't run, especially not from a party full of college students. I shrugged, unfazed while Maya snarled away in my ear. The frat boy smirked, but there was nothing playful about the expression. Even with his floppy hair and straight teeth, his beauty was marred by cruelty. Well, that's not entirely true, right? Most of us, we're not idiots. We've done our research on you, Luna. Why do you always have to start, Devon? A feminine voice snarled, which I quickly realized belonged to Alex. Her neon streak was darker, but still unmistakable. One of the many perched around the flames, watching the showdown between a drunken and their Luna. "Dude, Cass warned you," a guy's voice grunted. "Cassidy?" Devon spat, his eyes narrowing on me. I kept my stance relaxed, unbothered, since bothered is exactly what he wanted me to be. "You idiots only listen to her because she's crawled her way into the Alpha's bed. She's been there a lot longer than you, Luna. Have fun sharing your throne, bloodsucker. I ran once, but if you've actually done your research, then you'd know I'm an entirely different person now." As always, I was reminded of my power when the shadows surrounding the forest pulsed and quivered. Tendrils slinked forwards, only to retreat when they reached the glow of the firelight. Called by my anger and irritation, born and bred to tempt. I was sure that no one here could see them. No, they'd be running in terror if they could see how they pooled around my ankles, close but never touching my skin. However, there was a darkness in my voice they could feel, like the icy caress of the shadows across their skin. "I'm a little busy right now, searching for your alpha. But rest assured, I never forget a face. We'll talk again," I promised him, letting cold rage splinter and fracture within the depths of my eyes, staring until his throat worked and gaze flitted away. My blood was racing as I turned on my heel and stalked off, keeping my shoulders loose and posture relaxed. The last thing I needed was for them to taste my rage, the anger that came with being disrespected, especially when power pulsed beneath my skin. "They keep getting curious, coming without being called," Maya said, worriedly. The two of us glancing towards the shadows that now scattered, deep within the darkness of the forest, always watching and waiting. Chapter 112. I made it halfway down the beach when a series of cheers and whooping filled the air, followed by laughter and thundering feet. There were at least 100 men and women running down the beach, towards the forest's emerald leaves, muted from the dark but still beautiful beneath the moonlight. A few shifted prematurely, shredding bathing suits and swimming trunks as fur sprouted from their arms, neck, and torso. For many the shift was instant, an animal breaking free from its two-legged. Large paws dug into the sand, spraying those who hadn't yet shifted. Some shouted and groaned, while others laughed and tried not to get it in their eyes. "Manhunt! Manhunt!" a few guys chanted, dispersed throughout the crowd. Their voices were nearly dead in the laughter and cheering. Still, the word brought nothing but confusion. "Isn't manhunt like adult hide and seek?" I asked Maya, even though there was no way she'd know the answer. When she responded with a shrug, I cut my losses and peered down the beach. I couldn't see too far, but there were still 4 fires that dotted the sandy dunes. People sat around them, most obscured by distance and darkness. It was unlikely Maddox would be sitting around a fire, surrounded by people, as he ignored my voice ringing in his head. "Maddox! I'm walking down the beach. Where are you?" I called out, only to again be met with silence. "Let's not panic," Maya said firmly, but I was no longer sure if she were talking to me or herself. There could be a good reason he's ignoring us. Hopefully, there's a good reason for this feeling I'm having. I grunted, unable to place the odd tingling in the pit of my stomach. I could walk down the beach and search each bonfire, or I could go into the forest, which seemed the more likely option between the two. My mind was concocting all sorts of things. Perhaps he had found a vampire lingering on the borders, or did something new happen with the witches? It had been almost 24 hours since their first AK, and I was already beginning to wonder how soon the second would come. As I tried to convince myself there was no need to worry, irritation began to take hold. I would know if something happened to him, but Maddox wouldn't ignore me. With a huff, I turned and chose one of the dirt trails that led into the forest. Maddox's scent was practically all over the place, trailing throughout the forest from recent and old patrol routes with Zeke, Mason, and countless other warriors. It would have been easier if nearly 100 people hadn't just come storming through, but it was better than searching a dwindling beach. The beach behind me all but vanished, swallowed by foliage, and cloaked by night. If I hadn't had a glass of blood before the party, the gust of chilled wind that passed through might have made me shiver. It wafted up the sweatshirt and through the flimsy bi bottoms that I wore. My feet crunched beneath the leaves and branches, padded across damp soil and rocky earth. The distant sound of shouting and howling, followed by laughter, rippled throughout the forest. I headed north, deeper into the forest and farther from the lake before cutting to the east. My intention was to circle back around, to search the car if I couldn't pick up his scent. A branch cracked not too far away, its sound deafening in my ears. My spine went rod straight, sending Maya on full alert. The feeling in my stomach was growing worse, turning sour and more wrong by the minute. Another crack, another snap. This one to the left of me, and then another to the right. The shadows twitched and writhed in the distance, and for once, I was half tempted to call on them. "We're being circled!" Maya snarled, sending a burst of strength into my legs as I kicked off into a sprint. We should have shifted, but only a few long seconds had passed before the feeling subsided, and the sound of padding feet grew quiet and distant. I came to a stop beside a great oak tree, using its thick trunk as coverage. Silence enveloped the forest for so long, that I jumped when a triumphant whoop filled the air. Before my hand could fall against my racing heart, something huge charged from the brush, barreling into me faster than I could process. There was no pain, only adrenaline and shock as I recoiled seconds too late. My feet twisted and tripped over the earth as this mass of flesh toppled me over, tearing the air from my lungs when I fell on my back. I snarled and thrashed, sweat and dirt clinging to my skin, filling my nostrils as they hovered over me, their weight bearing down on my chest. All too easily they wrenched my hands from my chest, pinning my wrists down with brutal force. I wondered if my heart would stop from how hard it hammered, from how fast the adrenaline coursed through my veins, heightening every sensation that rippled across my skin. "Hasn't anyone told you, little girl?" Maddox's voice was dark with anger, his eyes black holes that devoured my trembling, panting face. His breath fanned across my face. "Never go in the forest when a game of manhunt is being played. Not unless you're willing to play yourself." A fire burned low in my gut, searing my insides as it traveled lower to where Maddox straddled me. It grew, pooling between my legs every time I thrashed or made him snarl. How do I play?" I panted, sucking in a breath when his eyes zeroed in on my mouth, narrowing when my tongue darted out to wet my dry lips. I could see the outline of his hand and stiffened when it traveled lower. I thrashed when I felt the ghost of his fingertips gliding across my hip, where the strings of the bi met in a neat bow. I clenched my legs together, knowing it was only a matter of time before he could smell me, before he could find out how depraved I actually was. "You play by running, by praying you don't get caught." His voice was soft, but there was nothing gentle in his words. They were unforgiving, revealing a fate I couldn't escape. I stiffened beneath him when the pieces clicked together in my mind, bringing back a memory I thought I had long forgot. In the past, Tyler and I had been to countless parties. Being seen with him enhanced my image, made me more important than everyone else. Or that's what I had thought at the time. There had been one party in particular, one where Tyler vanished halfway through. A game of chase had been happening when the moon had risen, between nearly a dozen male and females. I had never once thought Tyler would be among them, that he would cheat on me of all she-wolves. Even when he appeared just an hour after the final howls of the night sounded, I never once entertained the thought. Chase, as my pack called it, was a game between unmated males and females, one that almost always ended in having carnal x, deep within the forest. I had never played it before myself, and not once did I think a different pack might call it something else. Seconds had passed and yet I still asked, and what happens, if you get caught? Fingers brushed my T*H, raising goosebumps even though the chill of night held no effect on me. The dainty bough that held my BI unraveled, rendering the scrap of fabric useless. I felt him breathe deeply, his voice turning guttural. I can smell you, Lola. You know exactly what happens. His hand ghosted towards the other bough. Perhaps it was his determination, or my waning will to fight, but it had been all too easy to situate himself between my legs. It had all but vanished the moment his hand slipped between my legs, seeking out the heat between them. Stubborn as ever, I bit back my groan when he dragged a finger through my folds. There's more out there, wanting a taste of you. He murmured in my ear, peeling away my useless BI bottoms and tossing them to the side. He did another long drag with his fingers. I ground my teeth together, refusing to give him anything, even the barest of sounds. He let out a snarl as he grew impatient, making my eyes roll when he pressed the pad of his thumb against it. Will you fight me, Lola? Even though I've caught you fair and square. There was that anger again, delicious as it seared my skin and made his movements blissfully rough. His fingers dug into my wrists, pinning them harder against the earth. His teeth nipped at my neck, the euphoric sting of them pricking my skin made my back arch, giving me a glimpse at how much Maddox was enjoying himself. Even after I stalked you, hunted you, you'd fight me. When my face turned red and I refused to answer, he smirked against my neck. You're angry with me, for ignoring you, my sweet little mate. Allow me to make it up to you. Ever so slowly, he removed his hand from my wrist. The moment I began to move, his hand came slamming back down. His voice was harsh, barely concealing a threat, keep your hands where they belong. I had promised myself I'd keep up my silent protest, fighting even when my body ached and craved his rough touch. There was nothing gentle about the way Maddox worshipped my body, dragging his teeth and lips across every inch of my skin, leaving tiny welts in their place. When his arms wrapped around my thighs, pinning me against his mouth, the sound that left my mouth was unmistakable. He had torn the scream from my throat with his tongue, running it through my folds and against me with eyes that burned with ferocity. Chapter 113. Just when I thought Maddox would put me out of my misery, he stiffened above me. Even his breath halted, grazing just below my collarbone. He cocked his head to the side, his voice deadly calm. Why is my brother's scent on you? I froze beneath him, my mind taking a few seconds to process his question. I sniffed the sweatshirt I wore, catching remnants of wet sand, fresh water, and sunblock. Maddox's scent had mixed with my own when we completed our bond, but hidden beneath it all, I could distinctly smell Brandon's mint and cheap beer scent. I hadn't even realized, and neither had he until now. Don't, Maddox! I warned him, sitting up when he leaned back on his knees. Shirtless and bathed in moonlight, he looked like a vengeful G*D, eyes swirling with flecks of gold. He's using me to get a reaction out of you. Believe me, I didn't let him get away with it. Show me. He snarled, his anger directed towards younger brother. I had always had this adverse reaction to Maddox's anger. While everyone else blanched and cowered, I found myself excited. My body reacted as it always had in his presence, even though my legs still trembled from what happened moments ago. My mind, however, was focused on not igniting a war between two hard-headed brothers. With a sigh, I let him into my thoughts, replaying the brief encounter with Brandon. I could hear Maddox's snarl in my head, feel his rage at his brother's words. Even the begrudging satisfaction he felt when my knee sent his brother to the ground, was fleeting. As a tremor ran down his shoulders and spine, I wondered how close my mate was to murdering his brother. This feud between the two of them clearly ran a lot deeper than I had thought. KG, your brother wouldn't win people to our side, it would send them running in the opposite direction. I tried to convince him in the only way I could, by keeping my stubborn attitude in check. We have more important to worry about. If he can't keep his hands to himself, I'll make him. Who knows, maybe I'll let Maya bite off one of his hands. It's better than you hunting him down while he's drinking himself into a stupor. He already knows he's going to pay for touching you, but he knows I'll wait until he's sober. Maddox grunted. Frustrated, he ran a hand through his hair, making the once neat strands messy. I knew he'd use you to annoy me off. I expected him to insult you or disrespect your position in the pack. It would have been easily dealt with. In other packs, it is a DH sentence to touch an alpha's mate. I frowned, surprised that this was something he had contemplated. Sean had pissed me off more times than I could count, pushing until we were both red-faced and shouting at one another from down the hall. Dad even had to intervene a time or two. He had doubted my capability when I first returned home, but not once had I thought of hurting my brother. What happened between you two? I wanted to know what would cause such a divide between them, what would pit brother against brother until there wasn't a shred of familiarity left. I'm not sure I even know anymore. His version of events might be different than mine. Before I could learn anything further, or at the very least, quell Maddox's anger, his beta's voice played within our heads. Alpha, Luna, we have a Cordelia Warren here at the main gate. Her credentials check out, as does her luggage. We clear to send her on through. Maddox and I locked eyes. The rune and protection witch was here, which meant we could finally comb through the house he had built for us. I wondered what damage the witch had done. Who knew how much time she had to roam the house, to tamper with anything inside? Escort her to the estate. I have to check in with Mason and the rest of tonight's patrol. Let her know we'll catch up shortly. I can head there now. I assured him, all too eager to put my relentless worries to rest. I hinted the reluctance in his eye and reassured him, Brianna and Giovanni will come with me. Have them meet you at the forest line. From the sounds of it, tonight's game of manhunt is coming to an end. I sent Brianna a quick mind link, making a small sound of satisfaction as she answered instantly. Her and Giovanni were nearby, already on the move to our meet-up point. I wasn't aware there was a patrol roaming the lake tonight, or that Mason had joined them. I guess that's why he wasn't at the party. I accepted Maddox's hand and stood, watching with held breath as he retrieved my bathing suit bottoms and retied the dainty strings. You didn't think I wouldn't have you protected at all times? He lifted an eyebrow and gave me a look, holding out the bottoms for me to step into. I'm letting them off early, anyway. Just in time for some after-party they were talking about. There's a smaller patrol that circles the estate. They're ordered to alert us both if they pick anything up. Giovanni pulled into the circular driveway out front of our estate, which still sounded strange to my ears. I gazed up at the bay windows that looked into the living room and pinpointed the spot I had been standing when the witch attacked. The AK last night, I get the worst feeling any time I think about it. I said absent-mindedly. My confession made Brianna and Giovanni fall silent, both of which watched me curiously. What kind of feeling? Brianna asked. Like, I paused for a few moments, trying to turn a vague feeling into words, like this is just the beginning. I wouldn't voice my other feeling, that there was more to this AK than what met the eye. No, my father had nothing to do with this. The man himself, he was DD, his body burned along with the rest lost that night. I've seen the feelings Holly gets. If you ever get them around me, let me know. She shuddered in the passenger seat. As for this just being the beginning, I have to admit, I hope you're wrong, Lola. I do too. Cordelia Warren was what Grandma would have turned out to be if she had been born a witch and not a werewolf. Her chestnut hair, streaked with grey, was held back by a bandana. Laugh lines creased around her lips, and at the corners of her eyes crystal earrings dangled from her ears, matching the silver pendants around her throat. She had the same knowing light in her eyes as Grandma, along with a kindness that instantly set me at ease. Her scent was one that brought back memories of Grandma's cottage, the scent of her herb garden as it baked beneath the sun. Giovanni leaned against the wall, in between Cordelia and me. The warriors that had escorted her here remained outside. How wonderful to meet you, Luna Lola. She smiled warmly, the bracelets on her wrists twinkling as she clasped her hands together. I felt like I was greeting a distant family member when she let out a soft sigh and said, "Let me get a good look at you. You don't have to call me by my title. Lola is just fine," I assured her. "Nonsense, it's a title to be proud of." I stood a few feet away, swaying awkwardly, as the middle-aged witch looked me up and down. There was nothing disapproving in her gaze. If anything, I couldn't help but feel as though she were marveling a bit. "Strong, hard-working hands," she murmured, toying with one of the pendants around her neck. "You've got old magic in your blood. Passed down through your lineage, I reckon," she said, turning to rummage through a large tote bag she had placed on the couch. A dainty-looking amulet was shoved in my face, the chain thin and gold as it caught the light. "Take this and wear it. The stones inside are quartz and citron. It'll help focus your thoughts and strengthen your magic. Had you have been trained, that dark witch wouldn't have dared step inside your household. Whoever she was relying on your inexperience. What you don't know, can in fact hurt you," Brianna said with a worried frown. Her eyes brightened as she eyed the necklace in my hands. "So you're saying the crystals humans buy from those little shops are actual magic? Mom got me a few last year, I keep them on my nightstand. My favorite is the little amethyst geode. I actually brought that one with me." "Depends. Did your parents buy them from a witch?" Cordelia laughed, and the sound reminded me of fluttering wings. Brianna seemed relaxed around the witch, reinforcing the familiarity I felt. "Crystals work only when a witch fills them with her magic. It'll run out eventually, but they can be recharged. They're capable of different things, depending on the quality and shape. But without a witch, they're just beautiful rocks. Can they help protect me, and my people? Their power varies on how much time and energy you put into them. They cannot protect an entire pack and clan of vampires, but they can help keep you and your inner circle safe," she said softly, stepping forward when Giovanni's harsh expression relaxed. There was a sincerity in her voice that came from years of experience and understanding. "If you'd let me, I'd like to teach you what I know. At the very least, I can offer some protection on your journey." Chapter 114. Maddox arrived minutes after I had accepted Cordelia's help, slipping through the front door with much more stealth than he should have had for someone his size. I spotted his towering form from across the room. The crease between his eyebrows and tension in his shoulders were among the first things I noticed. "Was everything all right with patrol?" I asked, drawn to his side. He slid an arm around my waist, letting his hand rest inches above my backside. I could feel the ire he was holding back and gave him a stubborn look. I let my thoughts mix with his, so that he would be the only audience to what I said next. "You're not running this pack all alone anymore, Maddox. You can tell me things. Patrols are running smoothly. It's just quiet out there." Maddox cleared his throat, directing my attention from his plush lips and eyes of molten honey. His thumb skated along my pulse, those lips twitching as they registered the brief spike. His eyes flickered to Cordelia, who had fished out a bundle of sage from her bag and lit the end with a match until it was smoldering. Maddox watched with a dry expression as the middle-aged witch wandered throughout the lower floor of the house, humming softly as she wafted the burning herbs through the air. "An honor to meet you, Alpha Maddox. And thank you kindly for allowing me inside of your pack," Cordelia said with a warm voice, giving Maddox a motherly smile. He blinked a few times, watching the witch as she continued throughout the house. We followed her up the stairs, both Brianna and I cooing as Maddox gave us a tour of the second floor. The halls were wide and the ceilings tall, but they were nothing like the labyrinth of Tyler's house. Maddox knew the last thing I wanted was to live in an empty mansion, where my footfalls and hushed breath would be the only sounds to grace the halls. "The house is beautiful. It's better than anything I could have imagined," I made sure to tell him, hiding my smile as pride swelled in his chest. "Burning sage will get rid of the witch's negative energy." I could tell her happened in the living room. That's where the funk was thickest. She addressed both Maddox and I, her hands clasped together. "I sense no spells or curses placed on the premises, so it'll be safe to stay here tonight. I'll come back tomorrow, and we can go over some other means of protection for you." As Brianna and Cordelia began chatting about crystals and their different structures, I was focused on Maddox and the cell phone pressed against his ear. Even without enhanced hearing, I'd be able to pick out Zeke's boisterous laugh among the crowd cheering through the phone. Some obscure pop song thundered through the phone, drowning out the sea of individual voices nearby. "Hey, Ash!" Zeke shouted from the other end. The rest of what he had to say was muffled by the crowd and pulsing music. "Some kid, knocked out, cops, didn't even believe I'm an alpha." I felt my lips twist into a smirk when Maddox gave me a look that said, "Don't even think about it. Never call me Ash again." Maddox rolled his eyes, running a hand over his stubble-covered jaw. The frustrated action had an unintended effect on my lady parts, who found Maddox even more alluring when he was pissed off. The dark look he threw my way only worsened that feeling. "Can you blame them for not believing you're an alpha when you're drunk?" Zeke, pouty and defensive, shouted through the phone. "Not drunk, couple bottles, best friend forever." Did he just say best friends forever? Brianna snorted, clasping a hand over her mouth to hold back her laughter. "Who knew Zeke was a clingy drunk?" I whispered, clutching onto Brianna as the two of us erupted in muffled laughter. Even Maddox, whose eyes softened as they found my face, cracked a smile. "Why not just mind-link me?" Maddox sighed heavily, be able to hear more than every other word. "No time, too drunk, hurry up," was all I heard on the other end, followed by a click. "What's he gotten himself into this time?" I shook my head. If there was one person who could get into more trouble than myself, it was Zeke. "Aren't you glad best friend here gets to go and deal with it?" Brianna teased, her grin growing wider when Maddox flashed her a dark look. "I have no clue, but if he's caused any damages, I'll take over his pack." Maddox grunted, and while Cordelia's widened in shock, Brianna and I smirked. Even Giovanni chuckled under his breath. Maddox threatening to conquer Zeke's pack was a frequent occurrence, but it was something we all knew would never happen. As stoic and brooding as Maddox acted, he enjoyed Zeke's chaotic presence as much as the rest of us. "I'll come with you," I insisted, sighing softly as a yawn rose in my throat. Even before we completed the bond, Maddox had this uncanny way of seeing right through me. The announcement, the assassination attempt, and the party girl only had so much energy when it came to nights of crappy sleep, even if she was a tribrid. "No. You'll stay here and get some sleep, like you've been wanting to do for days now." His stare rooted me in place, along with the fondness only I could see, the savage love that came with being mated to a beast. I let out a sigh, guilty because I wasn't the only one suffering from lack of sleep. Maddox had just as much on his plate as I did, and had managed it a lot longer than I. This time I couldn't hold back the yawn that left my open mouth, making my eyes water and grow heavy. Beneath it all, I was a little more than excited for tomorrow, to learn the basics of magic. I was more than curious about my witch heritage and hoped that this was my chance to fully understand what I was, which was becoming more complicated by the minute. "Go to sleep, Lola. You have a busy day tomorrow." The reverence in which he said my name made my heart flutter, filling me with a warmth that prompted me to wrap my arms around his torso, breathing in his woodsy scent. "You won't be long," I pouted, feeling a sense of relief when the husky words, "I promise," swirled through my head. "We'll stick around for a while." Brianna chimed in helpfully, peering up at Giovanni through her lashes. The way he looked down on her, the hidden adoration in his eyes, I swore he and Maddox had more in common than they cared to admit. "We'll also drop Cordelia off at the house on our way back. We just have to get back before the sun rises." Once Maddox left, I explained to Cordelia her new living situation. Her eyes lit up at the mention of another skilled witch, one she'd be sharing the house with. We spent the next several minutes talking, with Brianna providing a near-endless stream of questions that captured even my short attention span. Her hazel eyes held the same excitement her parents had whenever they discovered a new academic trove or forgotten piece of history. "If the Luna is all right with it, you're more than welcome to join our training courses. Not possessing magic doesn't mean you can't learn. We're always in need of more people to pass on the craft," Cordelia offered Brianna on their way out. Brianna gave me a hopeful look, bouncing on the BS of her feet with an expectant grin. I let her squirm for a few seconds, giggling when Giovanni had to steady her. "Of course, I don't mind if you come to magic training. Who better to keep me on task?" I smirked. "Awesome, I can't wait," she exclaimed, pecking me on the cheek. "Just text me what time you want me to come over." The moment the three of them left, I took the time to explore the bedroom Maddox had designed for us. As soon as I stepped inside, I was engulfed in his scent. Wood and amber along with the faint undertone of something purely male, husky, and mouth-watering all on its own. I understood why the moment I sank into the ridiculously large bed, much bigger than anything Maddox or I would need. I knew I could be a bed hog, but I wasn't sure anyone was that bad. The blankets and sheets on the bed were made of the softest cotton, midnight black in color. Maddox's scent clung strongly to the sheets because they were his from back home. It was a piece of the place we had left behind, a place that had once comforted and provided me with a sense of safety. I hadn't planned on passing out minutes after sinking into the bed, but with his delicious scent wrapped around me, lulling my already exhausted mind into a false sense of security, it was impossible not to give in to the urge. "I like the sheets," I managed to murmur seconds before my eyes fluttered shut, and my fingers grasped the pillow that smelled most like Maddox. "I knew you would." I thought I heard his raspy chuckle, but I was too far gone to take notice. Chapter 115. I was only partially awake when I heard the bedroom door open. The cold draft in the hallway whooshed into the bedroom, blowing Maddox's scent until it swirled around the room. My nose twitched, and even in my sleep I knew when he was near. Fingers brushed my cheek. Just two, trailing slowly to my jawline. The sparks, which could be overwhelming at times, turned subtle and soothing. As his hand drifted lower, grazing my neck and shoulder, he gradually came to a stop. I could no longer feel his fingers gliding over my skin, but instead knew where they hovered. For months I pretended the crimson mark on my skin was non-existent, a nightmare that I had long ago woken up from. Tristan was trying, working to make up for his mistakes and to preserve his people, but I'd always have the physical reminder of what side he had once been on. Even without his mark, as his queen, I'd always have that faint connection to him. Is Zeke alive? I mumbled sleepily. Alive and bailed out of the county jail. Maddox's reply had almost come a few seconds too late. My eyes fluttered open, confusion and amusement written across them. It wasn't surprising. Zeke with a bunch of college students, things we bound to get crazy. I'll explain everything in the morning, after we both get some sleep. My eyes opened just a sliver when I felt the rough palm of his hand against my stomach. A jolt of awareness rushed through me, similar to adrenaline as I caught Maddox's swirling golden eyes, peering at me through the darkness. The intensity of his gaze, the way he fixated on me obsessively. Was it screwed up that I found that intoxicating? You're wearing too many clothes. He grunted, tugging on the hem of my tank top with impatient fingers. Then undress me, Alpha. I giggled sleepily, stretching my arms over my head as I watched pale threads of moonlight stream through the CS in the room. Maddox replied with a vicious snarl, and I knew that if I reached out, I'd be holding the stiff length of him in my hand. He removed my tank top with surprisingly gentle hands, toying with the fact that goosebumps erupted wherever he touched. Cold air enveloped me the moment my chest was bare, the tank top I had worn discarded on the floor. My eyes were still shut, arms still splayed out above my head as I hovered in between sleep and consciousness, that euphoric state where everything felt both sensitive and cloudy. I could feel him watching me, peering through the dark as he devoured my soft curves. Oh, we were playing this game again. Can I play with you, Lola? I sighed softly, turning my head on the pillow to get comfortable. The haze had wore off as he slid my leggings off and tossed them onto the floor, leaving me hypersensitive and aching in all of the wrong ways. My BS bounced as I shifted in bed, my legs parting just enough for Maddox to slip his hand between. Lola. See how quickly you get wet for me. I whimpered softly when his fingers glided through my folds, collecting the wetness that coated my lips. As much as I tried to tone down my reaction, nothing short of a miracle could keep my back from arching when he placed a thumb against my, losing some of his earlier gentleness. You can try to pretend, but your body always gives away how much you want this. I sank my teeth into my lower lip, silencing my reply. It was in my nature to fight, to revolt, and thrash against anyone who would hold me down. It was the nature of a werewolf, a Luna, and a queen. There had always been something about Maddox that allowed me to let go, to forfeit the control I was always seeking. Handing it over to him, it was exhilarating. You want to play quiet, sweetheart? He chuckled low in my ear. His spontaneous nickname for me had nearly broken my vow of silence. There was nothing kind about the endearment. It was a challenge, a taunt, a promise. My eyes rolled when I felt the blistering heat of him against me. His laugh was dark and bottomless. That's fine by me. Don't make a sound. Goddess, what had I gotten myself into? I don't even have to FK you to make you scream for me. He grunted in my ear, just as breathless as I would have sounded. The feral need that boiled in him, it showed me how much he enjoyed this. He cursed under his breath. I had never seen him like this feral. Like the most savage parts of his wolf were rising to the surface. Don't make a sound. I wasn't sure I had ever screamed like this before. You can't help but scream, can you? There had to be something wrong with me. The feeling of his hand over my mouth, while he cursed and shuddered in pleasure, it sent me spiraling over the edge. At the last moment, his hand lifted from my mouth. His name was the first thing I cried out, sinking my nails into his shoulders as I went loose and taut. He held me close, his pace still brutal as he found those last moments of pleasure, curled up in Maddox's arms, with everything blissfully sore. I had the best sleep I've managed in weeks. It should have been common sense that with a good night's sleep came a long and stressful day. The next morning, I found myself perched on top of the marble counter in the kitchen. Standing between my legs, smirking down at me as I devoured my third bowl of cereal, was Maddox. This was our first time living together, without the company of either one of our families. That alone made it difficult, with our wandering eyes and greedy hands never getting enough of one another. In fact, we were well on our way for round 2 when Maddox's cell phone began buzzing. Zeke's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a picture he had to have taken himself. Maddox flipped the phone over, making me snort. Don't ignore him. Who knows what he's gotten himself into after last night, which you still have yet to elaborate on. I pointed out, flipping the phone back over. Maddox sighed and answered the call, while I ate another spoonful of cereal. He pressed the speaker button, and immediately I began laughing at the whine that was Zeke's voice. Don't make fun of me, lol. He groaned, his voice extra gravely in the early morning hours. I swore there was still a slight slur to his words, even though it should be wearing off by now. What do you need, Zeke? Party too hard? Maddox asked dryly. Ugh, can you come get me? I think I drank the liquor store. He moaned miserably, it even hurts to mind link you. I left my car at the lake. Some of Carson's gymnast friends drove us to the after party. Sure, we'll be there. Text me the address. Maddox's reply brought a grin to my face. Even brooding and grumpy, he was a good friend. How was that after party, Zeke? I asked. Which part? The one where I figured out that college parties charge you for alcohol, or when I figured out they'll let you have a tab, but only if the alpha is your best friend. Clearly, he was still somewhat intoxicated, because sober Zeke usually had an easier time filtering what he said. Or when I joined Carson and her little gymnast friend for a little the first 2 parts, Zeke. The first 2. I said hastily, placing a hand over my face. I'd like to hear more about that tab, and exactly who will be paying it. Maddox said, rightfully so. If there was one thing all college students had in common, human or werewolf, was that they could throw back some alcohol. Chapter 116. All right, so maybe he can use me to get a rise out of Maddox. I sighed under my breath, wincing when Brandon's fist slammed into Maddox's jaw. My mate absorbed the hit with a straight face, his golden eyes bright with anger as he grabbed his brother by the throat and shoved him back. Brandon, as cocky as ever despite the massive hangover he was sporting, quickly regained his balance. His dark hair was messy on his head and lacked the charm of naturally tousled hair. He narrowed his bloodshot eyes and snarled at his older brother, charging forward with enough force to knock a grown man off his feet. It was clear Brandon was a glutton for punishment. He knew Maddox would find him after what he pulled last night, especially after laying a hand on me. He stumbled out of some sorority house I had no name for, directly across the street from the after-party most of the university attended. Half-dressed and grinning ear to ear, he spread his arms wide and said, "Hello, brother." Even as Maddox charged up the front lawn, past the crumpled beer cans, empty bottles of liquor, and torn streamers from last night's party, his grin never faltered. "This is your fault, you know." I frowned at Zeke, snatching the canned margarita out of his hands to toss into the trash. I gave him a dry look. "Don't pout at me, Zeke. You know well if you hadn't had pointed Brandon out, they wouldn't be fist-fighting in the front yard of some frat house." Zeke was perched on the bed of a pickup truck that someone had driven into the front yard. Not only was he missing a shirt, but there were various words painted all over his chest and back in what looked like pink paint markers. At this current moment, he was scratching the words "Eat Me," which were located just an inch above his pant line. I sighed, avoiding the curious eyes of the hungover college students. The ones awake, anyway. I can only imagine what everyone else thinks, watching their alpha and his brother fight. Then they can look to their left, and see another alpha, shirtless and covered in pink paint. There were 13 separate fights last night, Lola. Only 7 of them were outside, and 2 were at the lake. Zeke laughed boldly, his muscular shoulders shaking before he winced and grunted from the harsh sound. He ran a hand through his messy hair, which smelled strongly of beer, and shrugged. Most of us have grown up watching Brandon and Maddox fight. Even if it wasn't their alpha and his brother, this would be nothing new. Now when claws and fangs come out, then we'll worry. Right now, they're just with one another. The more I paid attention, the more I realized Zeke was right. Both Brandon and Maddox landed some nasty blows, punches, and kicks that I knew would leave welts, but neither backed down. Even though he was a cocky, insufferable jerk, it was obvious that Maddox wasn't the only son of an alpha. Brandon was just as much Killian's son as his brother, fighting back with a ferocity that a normal werewolf would lack, especially when it came to sparring with an alpha. "What happened to Carson and her gymnast friend you were becoming so fond of? It must have taken you a long time to realize she wasn't your mate, not that she minded." I teased, forever scolding Zeke's playboy ways. "She left her phone in her car last night, had to Uber back to the lake to grab it." He shrugged, his lips twisting into a wicked grin. "As for her gymnast friend, she's still asleep. You wouldn't believe how flexible. I can live without knowing the details. Come on guys, already." I heard a familiar soprano call out, her voice alone hushing the small crowd that watched. "Maddox hasn't even been back a week and you're already fighting." Cassidy looked good for someone who had stayed up drinking and dancing, especially compared to some of the rougher-looking students. She had all of her clothes on, and wasn't rummaging through the shorts, shirts, and random pieces of lingerie scattered along the yard. Her sun-kissed locks were pulled into a high pony, the style showed off all the shades of gold in her hair, while mine seemed almost blue-black in comparison. "What are they fighting about now?" Cassidy approached Zeke and me. Her candy-pink lips twitched into a grin as she looked over Zeke's chest, and the paint that covered him. She tapped a manicured nail against the back of his shoulder, where the word "Thessie" was written. "Well, at least someone had fun last night. I'm glad to see my compliment wasn't wiped off. They're fighting because Brandon here won't get off Lola's back. The alpha's brother has a crush." Zeke joked dryly, shrugging when I gave him a look. "Oh, goddess. Well, I can't blame you for not getting in between them. 20 years growing up with them and I haven't had any luck diffusing that BB. She sighed, pulling herself up onto the tailgate beside Zeke. Again, I had that urge to ask Cassidy about what might have happened between the brothers but couldn't bring myself to ask while we were surrounded by so many people. I hope they work it out themselves, especially with how much they seem to hate one another. I shook my head, thinking of my own brother. Annoying at the worst of times, and a protector at the best. Thinking back to a comment Cassidy previously made, I inclined my head. You said at least someone had fun last night? I thought you were hanging out with that one guy Lars, I think. Lars. Cassidy spat the word like it was a curse. With her surfer girl looks, I hadn't thought she could look threatening, but I had been more than wrong. Her seafoam eyes flared with irritation. BD had a girlfriend, probably more than one. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not getting into it with another she-wolf over a guy, especially one like Lars. So not worth it. He had a girlfriend? What a piece of st. I scoffed, surprised at how easy it was to get sucked into girl talk with Cassidy. She talked a lot with her hands, and was passionate about life, but they were qualities I slowly began to find amusing. If you find yourself needing a little payback, you've got a Luna on your side. Oh, don't promise me that. The power will go right to my head. She dramatically swept her ponytail over her shoulder and sighed. Besides, he was kind of an AE. He asked me all kinds of questions about you, and the other vampires on your side. He asked about me and the vampires. That was worrisome, though we did expect retaliation of some sort. It was natural for everyone to be curious, but then why did Cassidy's words put a sour taste in my mouth? Just whether or not I thought you were dangerous or if I knew of any plans you were keeping from the pack. Oh, and if you were moving a horde of vampires into town, his words, not mine. Cassidy rolled her eyes and crossed her arms over her chest. He did say something about hot vampire BS, so I don't think he was completely against the idea. You think men like that would be able to shift into pigs, and not werewolves? I shook my head, cracking a smile when Cassidy let out a hysterical laugh. Maddox and Brandon's fight ended without a victor. Just two battered brothers still on hating one another. Brandon snarled his threats and stalked off, while Maddox internalized his, letting them shine through his rage-clouded eyes. I'm going to go find Brandon, make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. Cassidy sighed, hopping off the back of the truck to dust her blue jeans off. I'll see you around, Lola. Lola, Maddox. You need to get to the lake. Now. Mason's voice flooded my head, the tone of urgency caused my eyes to snap over to Maddox, whose anger had halted in its tracks. His busted lip and eyebrow were already healing, and while I hated the thought of him being in pain, his injuries were 100% self-inflicted. What? Why do you both look like that? Zeke frowned, no longer protesting as we dragged him to the car and sped off. It was clear something had happened when we arrived at the lake. The dirt lot everyone had parked in was roped off with thick, yellow caution tape. The various trails that led to the lake and docks were also blocked off, guarded by warriors with stone-like faces. College students lingered around the borders, talking in hushed tones with phones pulled out and cameras rolling. Their eyes and attention fell on Maddox and I. Rumors were whispered, suspicions and praises, all mixed into a chorus of voices that felt impossible to dissect and focus on. Mason, what's going on? I kept my voice low, knowing there was a crowd of college students listening to our every word. Since his mate was MD in a sour deal between myself and the Shadows, one I still blamed myself for relentlessly, Mason hadn't been faring well. He had been grieving these months, and even though he deserved all the time in the world, Brianna and I worried for our cheerful best friend. We missed his dimpled grin, one we hadn't seen for a long while now. Mason had found friendship and understanding in my brother, who had also lost his mate months prior. Not here, just follow me. He shook his head, looking a tad pale as we veered past the various trails and straight into the forest. I had no clue where we were going, but still paid attention to the various scents I picked up. Both Maddox and my own were strongest, but there were at least 40 others who had passed through this cluster of woods. The blood-chilling, teeth-chattering feeling of unease filled my stomach as we stepped into a little clearing, a small patch of grass carved out of the forest. Tall trees provided endless shade, drooping downward until their branches reached a few feet above our heads. There was something familiar about this spot, though I couldn't put my finger on it. I noticed her first, so much like Katie that my breath caught in my throat and my legs stopped working. I came to a stop, feeling every gust of wind, which grew colder as a cluster of clouds passed over the sun. There was a tremor in my hands as I approached, from both fear and unbridled rage. "Lola, not again!" I whispered, unable to pull myself away from Carson's glassy eyes. It made no sense. Tyler was DD, my father was DD. This shouldn't be happening again, not here, not in the capital of Maddox's pack. As my eyes took everything in, processing every extraneous detail, I realized that this was so much worse. A large puddle of blood had soaked into the earth, proving Carson had been moved and positioned against the base of a great oak tree. Like Katie, and those who had been MD after her, Carson's slender throat was torn open, her torso littered with gashes that had long stopped bleeding. Eyes that had once held light and laughter, lips that had once smiled and revealed joy, they were empty now, so empty. The cereal in my stomach curdled as I looked down, towards the photograph in her open hand. The Polaroid was covered in dried blood, but I could still make out the picture. An inexperienced Luna and a cheerful sorority girl, leaning against one another like best friends, posed for a camera just out of sight. I realized where we were the same moment. I noticed the note nailed to the tree, just above Carson's head. "We were here last night, Maddox," I said without looking at him, without looking at anyone other than Carson, the girl who had been MD, all because of her association with me. In this clearing. Those feelings Holly and I keep having, the nightmares that would wake her up screaming, it made sense now. Whatever was happening, it began with the witch breaking into our home. This senseless MR, it was just the beginning. "What does it say?" Maddox asked, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder, one I needed more than I'd admit. Knowing Carson's face would sear itself into my mind, along with everyone else we had lost, I faced my mate and spoke with a strong voice. "A queen without control of her kingdom is not a queen, but a pawn." Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.